Welcome to How to Read a Pedigree Chart. There are a handful of different inheritance patterns that can be observed in pedigree charts. You will be expected to know how to identify 5 different types of inheritance patterns, and they are as follows: autosomal dominant, autosomal recessive, X-linked dominant, X-linked recessive, and Y-linked. That one's not too important, but you still need to understand it. First of all, you need to know the symbols of a pedigree chart, so I'll explain what these all mean. Circle represents female, square represents male. Shaded symbols mean that someone's diseased or expresses a trait phenotypically. The dots represent someone who is a carrier of the trait, and that's always a recessive trait. The Roman numerals on the side here represent the generation number. As we can see in this pedigree, individual parents are shown and siblings are shown, like so, but there are no spouses shown. Now what does all this mean? The autosomal dominant, X-linked, recessive, X-linked dominant. In order to know this, we need to understand what those terms mean. If you know already, just skip this. Autosomal chromosomes contain genes that determine almost all of our bodily functions. In humans, we have 44 of these autosomal chromosomes, and sorry, this says X-linked. I was supposed to put sex-linked. Our sex-linked chromosomes determine gender, and they are the X and the Y chromosome. Males have an X and a Y chromosome, and females have an X and X chromosome. Now, autosomal disease patterns are a little different than sex-linked diseases. Let's take someone who has an autosomal dominant disease, and they are heterozygous for the trait. We can give them big A, little a to represent their genotype, and let's say they marry someone who doesn't have the trait, give them little a, little a. We can do the Punnett square to see the probability of their offspring being affected, and it shows that there's a 50% chance that they'll have affected offspring. However, with sex-linked traits, things are a little more complex because of gender. Let's take a male who has an X-linked dominant trait and give him this genotype, and he marries a female who doesn't have the condition and give her this genotype, and then we can do the Punnett square again to see the probabilities of inheritance, but this time it's different because of how sex chromosomes are passed on. We can see the daughters get the XX, and so it shows that 50% of the offspring can be affected, but 100% of the daughters are affected. So this shows us a kind of a rule that fathers always give the Y chromosomes to his sons and the X chromosome to his daughters, and the son's X chromosome always comes from the mother. These are important to understand. So now you're ready to interpret a pedigree chart. After some practice, you'll begin to see the patterns. First though, I'm going to give you some handy tips for reading pedigrees, so you might want to take some notes. So we have autosomal dominant patterns. In these ones, we can observe that there's no skipping in generations. That means that the trait appears in every generation, and generally there's an equal ratio of males and females affected. These ones are fairly obvious to see. Autosomal recessive, with these ones, with this type of pattern, there's skipping of the generation, so sometimes you won't see the trait in a generation, and then it'll just reappear suddenly. And again, generally there's an equal ratio of males and females affected. With X-linked dominant, again it's dominant, so there is no skipping of the generations, no skipping of the trait in the generations. I hope you're taking notes. But this time, usually more females are affected than males, because all affected fathers have all affected daughters. And we'll see some of these patterns when we practice in a minute. Then we have X-linked recessive. Recessive trait means there's going to be skipping in the generations, but usually more males are affected than females, and that's because all affected mothers have all affected sons. Every mother will have an affected son. Every affected mother, will have all of her sons will be affected. Kind of butchered that, sorry. Y-linked, they're really easy, male-to-male transmission only. So now, using this cheat sheet that we have created, we are going to practice reading pedigree charts. On the right here, I've got a bunch of pedigree charts that are available to students here at BYU-Idaho if you're part of the BYU-181 course. And I'll go through a few of them, explain what type of inheritance pattern they are, and then at the end I will cycle through the whole slideshow with a few seconds on each one so that you can pause the video and you can analyze it yourself and write the answer down, and then at the very end I'll give you the answers and you can pause as you go along. This is your time to practice. So for this first one, all of these questions, it all says what is the most likely mode of inheritance. A lot of pedigree charts, when you read them, when you look at them, there are multiple potential solutions. So you just have to pick the most likely one. So we look at this and we see that there is no skipping in the generations. The disease appears in every generation, so it's a dominant trait. No skipping means dominant trait. And then 1, 2, 3, 4 males affected, 1, 2, 3 females affected. Kind of an even ratio. And then to double check, look at the gender transmission. If it's an X-linked dominant trait, this affected father must have all affected daughters. This daughter is not affected, therefore this is an autosomal dominant trait. With this one, instantly it's recessive. 50-50 ratio of males to females affected. It's recessive because the skipping, right, it suddenly appears in this generation after never appearing beforehand. And so this is an autosomal recessive trait. That's an easy one. With this one, it looks like a dominant trait, but there are only males affected. This is a little odd. So it looks like a male who's affected has all of his sons are affected. Likewise here and here. So male to male transmission, this is a Y-linked pedigree. And then for this one, dominant because it appears in every generation, there is no skipping. 1, 2, 3 males affected, 1, 2, 3, 4 females affected. Usually for an X-linked dominant trait, there are more females affected than males, although this isn't a clear difference between the two. It's fairly close, but any affected father will have all affected daughters, and this affected father, all of his daughters are affected, so this would be most likely be an X-linked dominant trait. So the first thing we notice with this is the disease skips in this top generation, so it's a recessive trait. Is it autosomal or is it X-linked recessive? We count up the number of affected males and females. 1, 2, 3 males affected, no females affected. With an X-linked recessive trait, usually there are more males affected than females. Most likely inheritance pattern for this, X-linked recessive. I'll skip a few and go down here to number 8. So what do we notice? It's a dominant trait is appearing in every generation. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 affected females. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 affected males. Way more females affected. So it's hinting towards X-linked dominant right here. More females affected than males. No skipping of generations, and affected fathers have all affected daughters. This affected father has all affected daughters. This father, all affected daughters. This father, his only daughter was affected, so this one's fairly obvious. This is an X-linked dominant trait. And the last one. Okay, so it's recessive. 1 affected male, 4 affected females. With X-linked recessive traits, usually more males are affected than females, so that's a little odd. And we can look at this mother and see that she's affected, and if mother is affected, then all of her sons are affected because they get the X chromosomes from the mother. This son is not affected, so this is an autosomal recessive trait. Okay, so now you've had a bit of advice and practice. Use your notes, go through this. I'm going to scroll through a few seconds on each video, on each slide, sorry, and then you can pause it, analyze it, write down your answer, and then a list of answers will be given at the end. Good luck. And here are the answers. I hope you got them all right. If you didn't, go back and try and understand why. I hope this video helped. Thanks for watching.